Hi, it's Chris Titley here, and on today's episode of Scoreboard, I'm joined by Michael Klim. Michael, thank you so much for being part of this series.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Michael, we sit here on Friday the 13th of June. An omen, potentially. Oh, I don't know. Is it good luck or bad luck? I'm not too sure these days. It's probably bad luck, isn't it?
Well, look, I'm very fond of the number 13. I was born on the 13th. It wasn't a Friday, but still I kind of gravitate to that number. We've just had a full moon as well, so it's all a couple of days ago. So it's all happening. This is going to be a great podcast.
It is, and it took us a little while to get into the studio here. There's two sort of 40-something-year-old blokes trying to get a podcast going. It's a little difficult, but we're here now. We made it.
We did. I think there's so many different platforms, but we managed to get there, and I'm looking forward to it.
Michael, as we sit here in the middle of June 2025, how's your week been, and how's your year been so far in 2025?
Well, my week, to be honest, has been quite nice. I tend to travel between Australia and Bali as I have been for the last 13 to 14 years, and I've had a pretty busy period in Australia with treatment and work and family time, and just recently returned back to Bali to run my swim program, Klim Swim. So kind of coming back to routine and to a slightly different pace of life. And so this week has been kind of recuperative, I should say. I'm building up my social fitness, I call it, because I've lost that around sort of COVID time, and when I got sick, I sort of I really avoided social interaction and also putting myself out there. But it's I think now with a lot of things that I'm trying to get into the market, from the Klim Foundation to Klim Swim and other projects that are happening. You have to be present, and you have to be approachable.
Absolutely. Now, I was texting you last week, and you're at the GC, the Gold Coast. What were you doing there, and how do you compare the GC to Bali?
Well, I was actually on the way back from Nusa. I'm very lucky to be part of a food and wine festival called Nusa Eat Drink, and we just completed that. And my partner's working on the Gold Coast at the moment, so I just accompanied her. I like the Gold Coast. I've lived there before, and it's a place that I think I can see myself living in a not too distant future. But in comparison to Bali, look, it's Bali's got something special about it. There is this kind of organized and unorganized chaos, and it still has a pretty strong kind of culture that I think it underpins the whole island. But it's constantly changing. But it's also very much like the Gold Coast, where there's constant construction, and you can't really keep up with the demand. So, but for me, there is, I just find even when I land and when I'm walking across the tarmac, most of the time they put you on buses. Even the temperature, the smells, it automatically puts me in a kind of a different mood.
And Michael, you talk about living in different places. Your upbringing was in different places, and I think you moved to Australia when you were around about 12 or so. Do you want to talk a little bit about your movement and your upbringing then, and the memories, I suppose, of Australia?
Yeah, I consider it as a bit of a blessing that I had such a varied and diverse kind of upbringing. My dad, through his work commitments, traveled all around the world. We were stationed in India for 5 years, and Germany and Canada, and we eventually migrated to Australia at the age of 11, when I was 11. So I think at the time, as hard as it was for a kid to change cultures and friendship groups and environments, I look at it now that it's made me a lot more, I would say, cultured and adaptable. And I think I've remained very much a bit of a nomad. I like being on the move, and not because I'm running from the law or anything, but it's something that it just keeps me fresh. And I like to travel. I think it's one of those pastimes that I think I'd like to do until I die, traveling and experiencing new places and new people. And but arriving in Australia at the age of 11 in a completely different culture, environment, coming from Canada, and it was a little bit daunting. I was still wasn't speaking English all that well. I looked quite different, and yeah, probably took me a few years, a couple of years to I guess blend into everybody else. But one thing that helped me and always has is been my sport, my swimming, and I was able through swimming to automatically fall into that environment very easily. And I joined the Melbourne Swimming Club at the State Swimming Centre, and I was, I felt comfortable around the pool, and that was something that was always familiar to me. So no matter, what country we're living in, what languages being spoken around me, I felt like that was a bit of an anchor, and it gave me, I think I developed a lot of my confidence, which I was an introverted kid because of all these, I guess, the differences that I possessed. It gave me confidence because I was able to kind of express myself through the sport.
When do you remember jumping in a pool for the first time? Was it in Canada or was it earlier than that?
Oh, much earlier. I remember going to swimming training in Poland, probably around the age of 8 or 9. So, I've got memories of swimming pretty much my entire life. If I think about it, I've probably been swimming for about 4 decades. So, swimming is, it's been such a big part of my life, and not just from a competitive standpoint, but as a character building and a value creation kind of activity that, I've been able to, I guess, rely on at times and also fall back on at times. And it taught me a lot of lessons, good and bad. And so swimming has been kind of profound in a way.
Has your relationship with swimming changed over time?
Oh, absolutely. I think, when I was competing, I was so driven, and it was I don't know. People ask me, how did I stay so motivated and devoted to the sport? And I can't, as a competitive athlete, and I can't really pinpoint why. I know that my parents traveled and sacrificed and made choices for us, myself and my sister Anna, who played competitive tennis, and I knew that in the back of my mind that they had made those sacrifices, but that wasn't really the driving force. It was almost like, I don't know, I had this insatiable hunger to find out how fast or how far I could take the sport. And as I was getting better, I found there was more belief and support from other coaches and swimmers, and it just kept on fueling that fire. But for me, swimming has been, such a, I think it taught me a lot, especially in those tougher times, as probably after the 2000 games. But up to that point, it was very much, there was this drive to see how far I could take it.
And you touched on support there for a second, the support network through your youth and people, competing at different events and, geography and moving around, etc. Do you remember that support network there, the people that invested in you at the time?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the beauty about swimming. It's still relatively an amateur sport. I think it's still, up to a certain point, it's still very much an amateur club atmosphere where you have your Friday night race night with a barbie and people, racing money for club uniforms. And there is, the swimming families are so tight knit. They support each other. They carpool. I think there is this still a very tight knit kind of community feel to the sport. And I remember that distinctly, even living at the Institute of Sport, where, swimmers came from all around the country, from Perth to Albury, myself from Melbourne, but we became a family, and the coaches would put on barbecues on Sunday, and I think that's why swimming is, people regard it as an individual sport, but that community and I guess the team aspect of it is kind of underrated, and it's something that I remember distinctly. So, my Lynn Fowley, who was my, I guess my AIS mum when I was living there. She was the block supervisor for a while, then the team manager, and people that sort of guided me. My coach, who became my dad almost, when I moved out of home at the age of 16, and I literally would do anything that he said. Like I listened to him, I trusted him, I had faith in him. So. I think I distinctly remember that no matter where we went, that community was just as strong. And I think that's probably why I was so drawn to it.
You touched on the individual aspect then, but a lot of your trophy success came from relays, and I suppose you did relays through your youth as well, and that's part of a team. How did you balance, I suppose, refining your own individual performance alongside getting to know your teammates and building a team?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I wish I was able to replicate that same mental mindset that I had on the blocks when I was swimming in relays compared to when I was swimming individually. And even though I had some great results individually, all my best times and splits always happen in a relay environment, and I think that's taking. I think obviously just identifying it on reflection was taking the pressure away from my individual performance and success and being judged on how I performed, but actually just contribution and playing a role. And it wasn't really about an individual time, but just making sure you just do the best you can for your team, and the time was almost irrelevant. So I put a lot of pressure on myself. When I was swimming individually, there was a lot of always predictions and hype, especially early on in my career. And I think that kind of showed a lot of the times when I was in those finals and with a lot at stake. There's races where I didn't handle it very well. There's some that I did, but in relays, I just felt that there was just a different feeling. You're swimming not only for your teammates, for your country. There's that sense of support, and I really loved it.
Do you think you're more nervous on the individual race? Do you think that would be an assumption?
I wouldn't say nervous, because I think nerves happen at any kind of stage of competition. But I think managing expectation, I think the expectations were different when you're swimming for a relay, and I think being surrounded by your teammates right up to the point of your race, definitely for me it helped. I was probably a swimmer that would get over aroused or over focused, and just a little bit of tightness, and especially in sprinting, if you shorten your stroke by 1 or 2 centimeters multiplied by 30 strokes, you've already got 60 centimeters that you've lost. So I think you're dealing with such fine margins, and it can really affect you, which obviously for me it did occasionally.
I'm going to touch on the Sydney 4x1 for a second here. You came out of the blocks, you broke the world record 48.18, and you got out of the pool. Your other teammates jumped in. Those moments in between when you'd finished and watching your teammates, what were you doing? And what were you thinking?
Well, at first you have to sort of make your way out of the pool. So you go to the side, and at first touching the wall, I actually looked across at Alexander Popov, who was about to swim third for Russia, and he was the old world record holder and my teammate. I didn't catch his eye, but I know that he would have seen the world record being broken. I sort of made my way around, and I actually asked Thorpe to confirm that the time that I saw on the board was correct. And he said, yeah, you broke the world record. But then I kind of left him alone to be, and just that whole atmosphere in that stadium just was electric. So I just became a cheerleader, really. I mean, myself and Ash, and, you know, we just, yeah, Chris actually was the next one to finish. So we just started standing behind the blocks and cheering like everybody else. And especially that last 50 when Thorpe was mowing down Gary Hall, we felt ourselves almost, you know, standing over the top of the blocks. And it felt like at times we'd fall in, but it was, we just got caught up in the moment. And I did like every other Australian did in that time.
Did you, when you saw Thorpe coming towards you, did you have any idea where Gary Hall was and Thorpe was until obviously right at that last bit we can sort of look over the edge?
We knew that he was behind. There was obviously, when you're looking straight onto the swimmers coming towards you, it's hard to tell the difference. But we, even from the head-on view, we could tell that he was a fair way behind, and there was obviously a big screen above the scoreboard. And when we looked up at that, he was a good body length behind when he came off the turn. So it was a defying moment around sort of between 17 to 15 meters to go, where Gary Hall's stroke rate sort of fell apart. Thorpe's kick lifted, and I think Thorpe almost felt that there was a shift in momentum, and he took another gear, and that's when we felt that we knew that he was going to finish strong. It's a straight trademark for, you know, he was only 17, but already then he was such a strong finisher. So I wouldn't say I was confident, but I gave ourselves pretty much every chance.
You mentioned Gary Hall then. You guys have been very competitive, but have also seen that you're also friends now out of the pool. Do you want to talk about your relationship with Gary and how that all came about, I suppose, during the battles, but also after the battles?
Yeah, look, I consider Gary, you know, probably one of my closest friends in international swimming. And funny enough, Peter van den Hoogenband, who is also my rival, he's also a great friend of mine that I catch up regularly and we chat. And it, you know, it's made me realize it's, you know, swimming and sport, that it is only that. There is, and I sort of, both of those guys, Peter and Gary, use different tactics to get the best out of themselves, and but had an incredible competitive nature that, you know, Gary loved to build up a stage where it was almost a kind of a theatre performance if he was in character. And that's what sometimes as a coach, I talk to my swimmers, say, imagine you're putting on a superhero cape and you're about to kind of possess these superpowers that are going to make you swim or feel so much stronger. And I felt that that's what Gary was bringing, not only the attention, the rivalry initially between Alex Popov and himself, and then with the Aussies. He had this great ability to bring this focus and attention to the races, but also I think he used that to better his own performance. But he had this, at the same time, you know, he had this great sense of sportsmanship. To give you an example, in '98 when I won 7 medals at the World Championships, and had a blinder of a meet, and he gifted me a Les Paul Gibson guitar to congratulate me. You know, so I don't recall any other swimmer ever gifting me really anything. So to not only something of such value, but to be so thoughtful. And this is a couple of years before
the guitar.
He was sponsored by Gibson, and so I think, you know, Gary's my relationship with him only grew since then. He supported me with some medical problems. He's been obviously had some medical problems himself with diabetes, and became the only I think, Olympic gold medalists that ever compete with diabetes. So his dad had been an ophthalmologist, helped me with some eye problems in the past as well. So he's also on our advisory board for the Klim Foundation. So he's always been super willing to help. And recently with the LA fires, he lost everything, and all his medals got burned, and it was just so great to see that the IOC reproduced those medals and re-awarded them to him recently. So, I sort of, I think he's been great for the sport, and he's definitely a great mate.
Isn't that great that you're mates, but there's two competitive people going head to head and other competitive people going head to head, but then at the end of the day, it's just a race, and there's other things in life that are equally as important. And you touched on your foundation there, Michael. I'm curious to know about your foundation and why it's set up, and for the listeners out there that don't know about CIDP, which you have, can you give them a bit of an understanding about your story and what's happening?
Yeah, so I guess my story is I retired in '07. I started a business in skincare and launched a brand for men, women, and babies, and really sort of took that same approach that I had in sport, which is going at 100 miles an hour, not taking no for an answer, probably doing more than required. And I was living already between two countries, and grew this brand over 13 years to 16 different countries, and it was, a success. But it came at a cost, it sort of came at a cost physically and mentally, where I was traveling back and forth, and I was still training very hard. It was my kind of way to give me mental toughness and a bit of clarity. But one thing I neglected, which I think I obviously had people supporting me, and I paid more attention, was my recovery and my mental health, and also my just physical health. And slowly, towards just before COVID, a year or two before that, I started getting some symptoms in my legs where I had numbness and sort of in my inner thighs, and I started getting really sort of tingling in my shins and cold feet. And really, that year before COVID in 2019, my ankle started flaring up from years and years before, and my back started flaring up from an operation I had in 2001, and all these old injuries crept up, and my body just fell apart. And I was, that was sort of like a bit of a wake-up call, and I started sort of addressing those issues. But within 6 months, this CIDP was already very much active in my body, and I started getting a lot of muscle wastage. I lost the ability to walk, really. I have minimal sort of function from the knees down, so my plantar and dorsiflexion with my ankle is almost, I've got just a floppy foot with very little control, and on one side, the other one is a little bit better. But so it hit me really hard. That was sort of, we tried to preempt a little bit what was happening with my doctor, Gary Zimmerman, who was great. We were trying to sort of sort out my back and then eventually the ankle, but CIDP had already sort of, attacked me. And look, I think it's one of those conditions. It's an autoimmune conditions where your body attacks your own tissue, and with CIDP, it attacks the myelin sheath, so the sheath that surrounds your nerves. And if that is compromised or fractured, the signal is not being sent correctly to those different parts of your body. And in my case, it's been peripherally my feet. It was a huge shock, and I can't believe we're coming up to 6 years since my diagnosis. But for someone that continued pushing myself, not only I still swam a lot. I made a comeback in 2012. I started doing running and cycling, adventure racing, surfing. I was kind of into everything. And within probably 6 months, I was unable to walk unaided. I became, it just completely changed myself mentally, my personality. I felt like something was really taken away from me. I felt like I lost my identity, and took me a couple of years to, come to terms with, with the grief and the grieving process, which I was in denial of. I felt there was just a temporary issue that I'll be able to overcome. And one thing that was tricky was that everyone that I spoke about it, or that they knew about it, was saying, "Oh, you'll be fine. You're an Olympic athlete. You've endured things before. This is just another little stepping stone." But deep down inside, I knew this was more than just a rotator cuff injury or a sprained ankle. And it hit me deep, because my entire brand for many years was based on my active outdoor lifestyle and my physique and all these sort of things. And I felt that by that being taken away, I felt that I would be lost, and I wouldn't not be able to give any value back to my family. I wouldn't be able to provide. I wouldn't be able to, contribute to society, and all the worst thoughts possible. But it was with great help and support from family and friends and the swimming community, and also just like people that have been through tough times. Getting myself mentally strong to then act with action to try and not necessarily beat CIDP, because there's no cure, but I certainly have been able to stop any sort of I'm very, very much, in terms of my symptoms and abilities, kind of plateaued. I'm stable. So I've learned to live with the condition, and I've identified there's so many great things that I can still do, and live life to the fullest with this condition. And part of that was starting a foundation, which I wanted other sufferers and caretakers and caregivers to maybe not experience some of those things that I did, from a mental standpoint, from, you become an expert in a condition that is relatively unknown. 2 to 3 in 100,000 people only have this condition. So there is very little literature. There's very little protocol. So the foundation was kind of was created because I inadvertently became a spokesperson for it, and had so many people contacted me about being grateful for the condition being put up in the public eye.
You touched on grief and denial when maybe you were diagnosed, or someone said that you've got this and it's not going to go away. I'm curious to know how long that period took, and what the mind dropped, as you said, in terms of I can't do this, I can't do this. What was the kind of the catalyst, you reckon, to bring you back up to say I can contribute and I can be a voice and I can be an advocate and life's okay?
The catalyst, very good question. So, I had all the tools that I think I needed to get on top of it, in terms of mentally and even physically. So I had access to the best physios, sports science people from the Institute of Sport. I had a great, counselor. I had, support, a very supportive partner, family, friends. But the thing that was lacking was my own personal motivation. And it was at a time where I was kind of sabotaging my own rehabilitation. And not only, I was doing some exercise or swimming, but I wasn't really eating well. I wasn't resting enough. It was COVID. I was drinking too much. I was, so I was, it was a point where my parents and my partner and my sister and a couple other friends said, it's really up to you. Like you have to make these changes in your life, bit by bit to, to create a new norm. And some people were pretty blunt. They said, look what you've been able to create with your swim schools, and you've got beautiful kids and supporting family, and so many people now are kind of following you in terms of your journey. And Lifeblood, actually, when they reached out to me to be the ambassador for plasma and blood donation, was I get emotional about talking about it, because it came at a very, very critical time in my mental health journey where I needed something to give me purpose. And to be a spokesperson, to be publicly a leader in a very small community, kind of gave me that sort of motivation to change and try and lead by example. So the biggest changes that have happened, really, because my condition hasn't really sort of moved for a few years now, have been lifestyle changes. And with those lifestyle changes, my mental health is just, I look at how I am now compared to maybe those first 2 or 3 years. It's chalk and cheese. I can't even actually almost comprehend it. I was a recluse. I wouldn't go out. I sometimes wouldn't even get out of bed. Exercise was foreign to me. I didn't want to get in the pool. I hung up on a lot of friends that were calling and reaching out. And I think it's until the point that myself are ready to take that action for change, it doesn't really matter. So it was, I guess that was the defining moment where I realized that it was in my control, no one else's.
It's very powerful. I'm also curious to know about the leaps. You talked about the leap from where you were to where you are now, and looking back, it's chalk and cheese. Those leaps, were they 1% leaps, or did you take a giant leap saying, I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore? Or is it more like, let's reduce the intake into my mouth of what I'm eating slightly, or was it just a blanket, like, right, I'm starting from scratch and I'm doing this, I'm doing that?
It started, for me, I think that's when, once I made that clear sort of decision in my head that I was going to try and improve myself, and probably, starting with just owning my mental aspect and devoting myself to being strict with my counselor and working on that grief process, and then really identifying what I can do, what I can control. And, alcohol was one of them. My food intake was another. Going back to those things that were very natural to me in creating a routine, movement as well. I get so much pleasure from swimming, from exercising, swimming in the ocean, being outdoors, and implementing these things back into my life that I never used to think about. I would do them because I know that made me feel good, but for one reason, well, we know why I did it, but they disappeared, and even though I had all these tools, I wasn't using them. So it was, for me, it happened quickly, but it was definitely one step at a time.
And then reconnecting with those people that reached out, how was that experience? Was it a bit cathartic sometimes?
You know how sometimes people say, or you hear it all the time when people say, my illness or this trauma or whatever has happened to them has been the best thing that's ever happened to them in their life. And whenever I used to hear that, I used to go, as if that is really the reality. Why would you wish something like this to happen to you where it is so hard to deal with? But I'm actually one of those people now to say that from my condition and my circumstance and the trauma and the tough times, I there's so many things that have turned to a very strong positive in my life. My connection with my kids is 100 times stronger. I've reconnected with a lot of friends that, Daniel Kowalski and Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett and Simon Cowley, Adam Pine, Brett Hawke. I mean, Chris Feidler, everyone, all my management, people that have just reached out and have been there all the time. I'd stay with Daniel every time I go back to Sydney for my treatment. I catch up with Thorpe regularly, and I've got, I felt like connections that probably were neglected for years, I think are stronger now. I'm very fortunate that I've also have a partner that basically devoted herself to helping me get better, and that is that is very rare, and I feel indebted to her for the rest of my life, because now it's, I'm better, and it's time for her to kind of now pursue her, her interests and her career. But definitely, there's some things that, and now I feel like I'm in this area of kind of service where I'm, being able to spread a message where things, you can tell people that, yeah, things can get really bad. We will in our lifetime experience something that is not ideal, if it's health or if it's financial or personal or whatever it might be, but there is a way out of it. And everyone, people might have different recipe to get out of that hole, but it is, there is a light at the end of that tunnel. So, I think being now, I look at it in a sense where, with the foundation, with Lifeblood, with a lot of, even with Klim Swim, it's more of I feel like my role is in service and providing, say with Klim Swim, I'm providing knowledge to the grassroots of the sport, with the, I guess raising awareness about blood and plasma donation with Lifeblood, and with the foundation, I'm now obviously trying to help any future or current sufferers with CIDP. So the tide in my life has kind of changed, whereas before, I think it was, and probably a tough one to swallow, being a sprinter, there was a lot of ego, there was a lot of bravado, and I, the moment I dropped that ego about what people are going to think, how I'm going to look, it's kind of irrelevant, because if anything, maybe I think my personal equity as a person has probably grown because of what I've been able to do. So, and it's really fulfilling to be able to have so many people open up to me about their journeys, and not necessarily wanting help, but to feel comfortable enough to open up. And I just felt like I had to start a foundation where we can create a community that can share these kind of their stories, and hopefully one day we can raise enough money to fund trials, and who knows, one day find a cure for this condition.
Yeah, I want to touch on that for a second. The CIDP, correct me if I'm wrong in terms of the pronunciation, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy.
Yep, very good.
Thank you. Yeah, and you mentioned treatment there, and you mentioned you're on the blood thing. Do you want to talk about the treatment and then the connection, I suppose, to the treatment and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So with CIDP, it is rare. So like I said, 2 to 3 in 100,000. So similar to MND. MND, obviously, through Neil Danaher and his actions and the Big Freeze and Fight MND, they've done such a great job in raising awareness, funding trials, and I've almost would love to emulate kind of what they've been able to achieve. But with CIDP, it is every patient, I guess, has a completely different journey, and some people it's almost like a brother or a sister to GBS, which is an aggressive and acute version of CIDP.
With Skilly and Barre, is that right? Yep.
Yeah, correct.
Yep.
And a lot of people make a full recovery out of that. With CIDP, it's there kind of forever, and it's probably 30% of people can make a recovery. 30% of people kind of stay stagnant like I am, and the other 30, have a pretty steep decline and end up in a wheelchair, etc. So, and there is, no one's treatment and no one's journey is the same. Whereas sometimes with a lot of other conditions, if it's cancer or there are certain protocols that have almost repeated and people know they work. And whereas with this, there hasn't really been enough case studies. We don't have, from even physiotherapy protocols, how to, what's the best way to kind of tackle, physiotherapy. And from a nutritional standpoint, there hasn't really been a lot done in that. So just discovering, just obviously getting more data, talking. We've got some medical research people that will obviously try and work with the practitioners all around the country and start collating as much information as we can. And we've already have a pretty substantial patient handbook that hopefully will clarify a lot of these kind of mysteries that come with having this disorder. And that's probably one of the things that is the hardest thing to deal with, is the uncertainty where you're going to end up. Probably that's why, probably hit me really hard at the beginning, because I could have been in that 30% of people that end up in a wheelchair, which again, at the time felt completely daunting and destroying. But I've met some amazing people that have been much worse than I am right now, and still have a very positive impact on the community. So I guess the treatments vary, to answer your question, from IVIG, which is plasma-derived medication, and there's plasma exchange as well, which a lot of people use, steroid treatments. There is a lot of different kind of immune suppressant medication as well. So, and now there is a little bit of, I guess, research and exploration with stem cell kind of treatment as well, which is still inconclusive, but that's where things are heading. So, I guess there isn't any treatment it's a cure. The treatments are more to reduce symptoms and improve quality of life. So, and that's the same thing what we'd like to do with the foundation: provide services from, say, podiatry to physiotherapy, or give people guidance in certain areas. So, and also funding if required. So it is. It's the gamut of it. It is very daunting, and then we'd like to sort of streamline that process for everyone experiencing it.
And in terms of the treatment, can you access the treatment reasonably efficiently, or is it sort of in obscure places that you have to travel to, etc.?
Well, I'm very fortunate, and in Australia, I think we're very, very lucky and blessed that IVIG is subsidized, and it's obviously through the Red Cross, and it's free of charge. So I fly back and have my treatment every 6 weeks, typically at RPA, at the infusion center. And the staff, I've known them for over 6 years. They're amazing. But I have also treatments at Royal Melbourne and had them at Royal Perth. So there is a lot of flexibility as well in terms of where you have your treatments. But it is, it's not, the accessibility to it is not the issue. I guess it's progressing the types of treatments, and there might be something happening in other autoimmune conditions or other trials that might eventually benefit us as well. And we're very much at an infancy stage of this kind of this journey. So hopefully we can discover some great news or development in the near future.
Yeah, with the establishment of the foundation at its infancy, there's a big, you can make a big impact, by the way. Like, and obviously you want to make a big impact, and we're on this podcast, which is public. I'm I want you to shout out to someone in that treatment in the hospital if they're listening to maybe say thank you.
I'd have to thank my neurologist, Judy Spears at RPA. She was the one I actually moved from Melbourne to Sydney to see her, and she's been there the whole way, and a very sort of intelligent, smart woman that is the leading kind of neurologist in that space. So, but it's even all the nurses at the infusion centers. I see how hard they're working. They're constantly walking around, treating patients, and I just see the hours they're putting in, and it's not just my doctors, but it's everyone that is part of these hospital systems that until I was put in that situation, I didn't appreciate how hard and how much we rely on these services. And hopefully with Lifeblood, we're looking at actually utilizing some of the donor centers as infusion centers as well. That's something the foundation and Lifeblood are working with. Potentially in the next sort of 12 months, we can, for some of the simple infusions like my own, we can offload the hospital system and do it through a blood donor center. So there's a lot of great things that we can do in the future.
Mate, as you've got into your mid-40s, I'm going to say mid-40s, not mid to late 40s, and I'm turning 44 next month. Mid-40s, and dealing with CIDP. Have you become more grateful yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I've become my perspective on life has changed, and I'm very grateful that I have amazing people in my life, and I've realized, I think I touched on earlier, that I didn't appreciate how important our connection is with our loved ones, and I think a lot of the time I prided myself on being able to do things on my own and succeeding on my own, or having a company that I owned, etc. But I think it's now I value probably doing a value kind of quality over quantity. And that comes in all aspects of life, from material things to time, even with my family or friends. So it's been transformative, and and it's funny, I don't get FOMO anymore. I'd leave parties early. I don't do a lot of things that I used to do. I mean, I used to love surfing, just paddling out at sunrise and waiting for the sun to pop up and catching that first wave. I can still do that, but I do it on a paddleboard, and I used to have so much FOMO about my previous life, but now I don't have that, and I've been able to look at this beautiful life that I have with beautiful people, and being able to even talk to you today and share my story, and hopefully this might have an impact on somebody listening out there, that there is another side, and you can make a difference personally, but there is always someone around you to help you as well.
Michael, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that, and hopefully there is some people that are listening that can take that advice. And part of the reason I do the podcast is to talk to people like yourself that can offer help and advice and tips, and not even just advice, but more so about experiences. In most podcasts that I do, I ask a couple of questions. One is your scoreboard moment, which is a moment in your life which is very vivid and very clear, and from that direction on, things have changed. We may have touched on it already. Apologies if we have, but your scoreboard moment, Michael?
We touched on it briefly. Was the World Championships in Perth. It was when I guess I was able to reach the pinnacle of my sport. After Mark Spitz, I was the next person to ever win 7 medals at a major competition, and 4 of them gold, and becoming a world champion in Perth in front of a home crowd, in front of my parents. I still remember what I remember, actually, the vivid moment, which is, you'll probably find amusing is getting home after the closing kind of little ceremony that we had at Challenge Stadium, and I was awarded Swimmer of the Meet and putting the trophy down, and everyone by that stage had gone to bed, and there was a team management and my coach was still there, and I was able to order a steak, and I was just having, after this crazy week of, media and swims and adulation and crowds, there was no one else in the restaurant. There was maybe 3 or 4 people just from the Australian swim team, and it was just me eating a steak with a trophy next to it, and it was kind of a nice moment of reflection. So that's for me. That was I remember that. It's weird. I almost remember cutting into that steak.
And did someone plonk a bottle of red next to it?
Not at that stage. Not at that stage. No, I think we were still under team bylaws. But
that's a great scoreboard moment, by the way. I love that inner piece of like, I've done it, and now I'm going to enjoy a steak. How good's that? Yeah. Simple but effective.
Exactly. And I think I might have crept into a few reds after that.
And the other question I ask is your all-time favourite sporting moment, which can include yourself, but it's also, I'm curious to know, as a spectator as well.
It would have to be the one with my 2 roomies in Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett. It was Athens 2004, the 200 freestyle final, where it was regarded as the race of the century to determine who was the GOAT in the sport of swimming. And Michael Phelps had very publicly kind of announced that he wanted to, once and for all, stamp his authority in freestyle and take on the great Ian Thorpe. Thorpe had obviously lost the 200 freestyle in Sydney, and he was racing Peter van den Hoogenbad, who was also in that final. Hacky was swimming incredibly well. It was a stacked field, and that was kind of the head-to-head the race that I remember watching, and to see Ian kind of the way he was able to control that race and dominate and prove that he was the greatest of all time at that moment was just sensational. And to then obviously go back and celebrate back in the village with those 2 guys was Hacky obviously winning the 1500 on the last night. I've been very fortunate that I've been sharing rooms with Australia's greatest swimmers over the years. So I've had memories of another vivid moment of, the last day of the Olympics in Sydney where, we come back from the medley relay, and by that we were getting little boxing kangaroos, and we put them under the bed, and when we looked under the bed, and we had between Thorpe and myself and Hacky, I think we had about 13 of them. So, so that was that was a pretty funny moment too.
What a great all-time favourite sporting moment, Michael. I've got one final question before we finish. We're living in 2025. There's maybe a 15-year-old out there that wants to be an Olympic swimmer, that wants to be a high-performing athlete. What's some advice that you can give them now, looking back now, living in 2025?
Look, I've been very fortunate that going back into swimming and becoming a coach since COVID. I've been able to look at the sport in a different way, and coaching teenagers. I think sport can teach you a lot of amazing life lessons, and I've witnessed people in the sport. Brett Hawke, for example, who only made his Olympic debut at the age of 25. So for those teenagers that are 14, 15, 16 that are struggling with should I continue, should I, it's the easiest road to take is to quit, to stop. But if I think I would say for anyone out there, if it's you have to persevere, be patient, because your time will come, and you're giving yourself the option of more choice. Because if you're swimming may not lead you into the Olympic final, but it might lead you to being a really employable person, or it might lead you to a different career. But whatever it is, it developed traits that people value. And I think, for me, for such a long time, swimming wasn't about Olympic gold medals and world records. It was about the people around me and the people that would support me. And so even my nephew, who's going through, I wouldn't say he's top 3 breaststroke in the country at the age of 14, and is struggling with, progression at times. And it's about, just persevering, being patient, trusting the people that are in your life, in your coaches, and even that immediate community. So, I think perseverance in sport can lead to a lot of great things, I think.
Michael Klim, thank you so much for being on Scoreboard, the podcast today, and congratulations on what you've achieved with your foundation, your swim school, and sharing your story of living with CIDP, and sharing a story about your childhood and all the things that have come with it to be who you are today and the identity that you are today. It's been an absolute pleasure having a chat, and really look forward to following your progress and helping the foundation where I can, and continuing to keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you for the opportunity to share with the listeners what I guess I've been through. But even the opportunity to be able to share the fact that the foundation is out there and it's present. So if you know anyone that needs any help, we have support on our platform. So make sure you head and check it out. It's the klimfoundation.org.au.
Fantastic, and I'll put that in that link in all the podcasts and the show notes, etc., so people can have a look at it. And thanks again, Michael.
No worries. Thanks, mate.